Hey, yo, from the Kingdom of Ohio. This is Occulture, where we know it was Berenstain all along, you history rewriting motherfuckers. I am Ryan Peverly, your master of ceremonies, the quantum mysticist, engineering this melodic Mandela effect all over those ear holes. And you know, we penetrating them at 528 hertz, and you know you're catching something fierce from this sonically transmitted discourse if you feel my flow. And speaking of that, let's get right into that flow state this week. We've got a YouTuber named smq.ai in the house. SMQ has been making videos for the past few months that present his personal philosophy and cosmology based on one simple idea, that we all died in 2012. Of course, a lot of strange things happened that year, if you recall. You had the supposed end of the Mayan calendar, which seems like bullshit now. You also have false flag events, such as Sandy Hook, which woke up a lot of people, this guy included. You also had the supposed discovery of the God particle by scientists at CERN. And the Curiosity rover supposedly landed on Mars in 2012. And then there's this potentially prophetic quote from Terence McKenna that SMQ brings up that has to do with history ending in 2012. And then there's this thing called the Mandela effect, which seemed to really ramp up around this time. And that's the basis for SMQ's YouTube videos. They construct his cosmology of our collective death in 2012 via subjects such as the aforementioned Mandela effect, and also things like cymatics, the cyclical nature of time, CERN, transhumanism. We touch on all these topics and more in this conversation, including some other things like creativity and muses and art as magic and vertical thinking versus lateral thinking. This is probably one of the more thought-provoking episodes that we've done to this point, and we do sort of ease into it, but once we get going, we gone. So hang on, because this pod is casting off into a reality where time and art are the only currencies that matter. Enjoy. SMQ, thanks so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. I'm fairly new to your work, though. A lot of the guests that I've talked to so far, I have been fans of them for, going on years for some of them. But you are someone who I just stumbled across on Twitter, actually, and I don't even know where or how. But obviously, the content of your Twitter feed, which led me to your YouTube channel, is quite intriguing. But before we get into all that, I'd like to talk about just you. Some of the listeners may not know who you are and what it is you do, so maybe you could just give us a brief sort of primer on yourself.
Okay. I suppose the way that I would say it right now is I mostly concentrate my efforts through YouTube currently. I try to get out a video once a week or so. I consider my YouTube channel sort of a living, breathing kind of apparatus that I use to kind of channel talent through that kind of morphs into a more or less kind of mosaic of different ideas and approaches to things that I believe in, and also philosophies that I abide by. And I try to make that channel something that's fun and interesting and thought-provoking for people. And I hope to grow it in interesting and in different ways. This isn't a bad critique on a lot of channels, but they kind of... A lot of YouTube channels, I would say the majority, they get a niche going and they stick with it, and they kind of have a beat going, and a lot of those channels that I'm into and I'm very interested in, and what I want to do is kind of deviate from that and kind of grow it and kind of mutate it into something more and more creative and interesting as I go on. And again, like I just said, for people who aren't familiar with my work, I primarily started out with talks on the Mandela effect and theories that I had on the Mandela effect, because I found it to be probably one of the most interesting things right now going around YouTube and really most of social media and Twitter. And I found some of the folks that were into it, the least abrasive and kind of more open and certainly by far the most interesting people that I've come across. So The channel originally started with me just talking simply unscripted, and this was back in February, unscripted on my thoughts on the Mandela effect and my theories on what happened and why it's occurring. And quickly, by my second video, it had exploded to 90 to 100,000 views within a month or two. And the video had to deal with the Mandela effect being sort of the world collectively coming to grips with a mass extinction event that happened in 2012 and that we're living in the afterlife right now. Now, I half did that as kind of a thought experiment, and I half did it as kind of my own way of exploring different creative ideas within the Mandela effect. And I think the Mandela effect is, even if you don't believe it, I think the idea of the Mandela effect kind of reshaping and refocusing what you think reality is important and thought-provoking and very fun and interesting. And I've been a creative person my whole life. Although my job officially is IT, I code for a living, but there's even creativity in that. But I just wanted the channel to sort of start off just exploring that and what that is. And long before I had heard of the Mandela effect, I was writing about things that were sort of related to that. Reality as it presents itself to us isn't always what it really is. And I've always known my entire life there's a lot more going on around us than we can perceive. And, I bring it up in other videos, examples as, what a human being can perceive, the kind of light we can see, and everything in the electromagnetic spectrum is very narrow and focused in terms of what we can perceive. And even the instruments that we create through science, even those are faulty in terms of what they're able to pick up on and perceive. So I thought playing around with those kinds of ideas and incorporating the Mandela effect with those would be something that would be fun and interesting and something people could really get into. And sure enough, the second video, people started to really get into it, debate it, a lot of trolling with me, and that was fun. I expected that, and that's part of the fun of it is, someone calling you insane or schizophrenic or whatever it may be, and trying to use that as a pejorative, and which I don't, but that's fine. And so I started to do a series of videos, and what I tried to do is create an internal world and kind of an internal environment that started to incorporate all kinds of other fringe ideas that were out there. I started to address, the Mandela effect and the mass extinction event in 2012 to AI, to, transhumanism, to anything under the sun that I could find. And I started to build a catalog of talks because there were no video to this at this point. When I started getting more into my first or second video for the channel, I noticed another channel had popped up that was quote unquote exposing me as being a shill, which to this day, the channel's gone, but I'm not exactly sure who or what I was shilling for exactly, because I wasn't promoting a product. In no way do I work for the government, or have I ever, so I wasn't exactly entirely sure what that was. And then what happened was the channel grew in intensity. And by this point, understand, I had one video that was breaking 100,000. My other videos were doing pretty well as well, getting anywhere from, 1,000 to 5,000 views. I ended up finally pulling most of the talks and the videos up through June, from February to June, was the channel began to frighten me. And I also began to worry about the validity of what this person was doing, and that was saying that there was someone in their lives was taking my channel literally and was becoming destructive because of what the content I was putting out on YouTube. Now, I knew that from the earlier videos that they had put out, they put out a total of, I think, 8 videos, I believe it was, and each one growing more and more in intensity, attempting to dox me. So I started to worry about my own safety, and they published a series of texts that were going back and forth, and I didn't know if they were real or not. But the person in the text were saying they were believing and taking literally what I was saying, and that they were feeling, they expressed negative feelings that I'm not going to get into. But I thought, on the 1% chance that this is something, then this is not what I wanted my channel to be. I wanted it to be something fun and interesting where people could debate ideas. And I would say 99.9%, even the negative people, they had entirely great conversations with one another. And it turned out to be fun most of the time with people who either got into the Mandela effect or even debated what it was. And that's what I was trying trying to foster that kind of really cool environment. But I thought on the off chance that if my channel and what I was saying would negatively affect someone in any way, that's not what I'm about and what I was trying to do. So what I went ahead and did was I privatized the videos. And then by that point, I was getting into video anyway. And I thought, my original mission statement was to take the channel into all different directions. So I thought I would keep the original thread of the Mandela effect, keep the original thread and the original sort of spirit of this cool idea of representing the afterlife in a way and in a context that I don't think I've ever come across, and kind of go with that, with kind of a talk going and juxtapose that with really cool videos and start working on my craftsmanship towards visuals. So since then, I've been working on videos like that, and I've loosened up on the 30 to 45 minute talks and gotten more into 1.5 to 2 minute videos where I can take a narration piece, add video to it, and then I've adopted this character of this teddy bear mask wearing a suit with a purple tie. And I think from there, I think we're pretty much caught up.
The teddy bear character is quite intriguing to me, and we may get into that a little later. To just comment on your YouTube issues, I guess, it's unfortunate that you felt the need because of the reaction to take those videos private, because they're really, as you've described them, creative and interesting and thought-provoking. And just to stay on creativity for one moment, because that is something that I'm interested in terms of I constantly urge people in my own life to create things because it brings me great joy, and I think there's a good sort of funnel of energy into, the creation process. But you have a personal philosophy on creativity that I'd like you to share with people if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if anyone is, what I'm about to say is part me, but mostly my inspiration comes from this book called The War of Art. It's by Stephen Pressfield. It's just a really cool book that I've had for years and years and years. And part of what the book believes and says, and part of what I believe and I say is, I believe that creativity is something metaphysical and mystical and magical, and that it's something outside of ourselves. And I think that every creator, whether it's a film person or a musician or a writer, or anybody that can bring something beautiful from nothing, I think you all know that, and I think we all know that these ideas come to you. You don't really create these ideas. So as I believe, and as the book states, we have to respect talent and your muse because it's chosen in you. And I believe that we act sort of as transmission stations to bring these ideas into being and into existence. So in order to be a creator, really what you are is you're kind of conductor of the train, and you can guide and you can shape it, and you can, decide the journey that the train is going to go on, but you didn't create the train. And I think that oftentimes talent passes through, or a creative idea will pass through a person, and they'll get it down and they'll jot it down and then they'll grow it, and a lot of themselves will be in that. But also too, I think a lot of that has to do with the world we can't see, and I think it has to do with higher guides and muses and understanding your muse and appreciating it. And I think a lot of what we see, particularly with creative people, is that there's a destructive side to it. And I think it's because we haven't been properly educated in understanding what the creative process is and how to respect it, and how to have great respect for being chosen, and having also great respect for understanding where your limitations are as a human being, not as a creator. And saying that oftentimes you can almost see it in someone when the talent is bigger than they are. It's almost like an intuition. You can see it, and you can see that it could end up being a destructive force on that person. And therefore, oftentimes, I think, there's entire swaths of YouTube that go after either Hollywood or they go after creative people, and they toss around all these things. And I think it's a misunderstanding, and it's because there's really been no study or no schooling, at least that I know of being able to harness creativity and use it in a positive way while not damaging the vessel that is transmitting that creativity into the world. And for all of the creativity we have out there and for all the artistic input we have out there, we have many, many casualty stories of great artists and musicians and painters and writers that ended up with, negative experiences or tragic deaths or things of that nature. And I think that a lot of that has to do with this head first dive that an artist will go into once they realize they're creative or they're intuitive, and they don't really take the time. And oftentimes it will hit you and you won't really have a choice, and then there are other times where you're allowed to grow up and be more introspective with your muse, and you're allowed to be and allowed to grow with it. And that's truly where you get something, that isn't as destructive to that person. And I truly believe this, and it's unfortunate that, simply because the outcome for the artist happens to be negative, that we can cast, their art or all of the artists before them and after them in a negative light. And I think that's kind of a shame, because I think that, art is the butt of a joke for a lot of people, but I think art is a form of magic, and I think that art is a very powerful form of magic. And I think that with a lot of other magic, whether it's chaos or ceremonial or whatever kind of magic you're talking about, there is always the law of intent, and there's always, what your intent is and what you want to bring into the world and how you change it physically or a person or an event or whatever it is. Versus art, it's brought through you and to you. It's something that's almost like the reverse of that. It's almost like you have changed from something outside that's been channeled to you, and that you're sending that out. And regardless of what your intention is, oftentimes, particularly if the talent and the art is big enough, it's going to, no matter how much you try, it's going to come out in the way that it meant to come out. And oftentimes I think there's just always one idea of one lamp. There's only one lamp and everything else is a copy of a lamp, or one pair of sunglasses and there's just copies of that. I think that the thing that art does is it pulls all of those things together into something that's original, and then it passes through you. And I think part of the process where it can be destructive is when I first started writing or first started penning ideas, they weren't very good. But, eventually I started to get into it more and more and more, and they started getting better, and to where now, with my sort of spiritual philosophy of the power of now, I'm able to almost meditate constantly and be able to shelve ideas, shelve concepts and creative ideas, and shelve them in order. And then as I need them, I can pull them off the shelf and then dispense them as I want. And that's a really cool place to be if you're a creative person. But if you have that ability already and it comes right to you, and let's say you're 14 and a prodigy, that can be a very negative thing if you don't have a proper guide to understand what talent is. And I think with a lot of other ways of thinking in terms of like political thought or other kinds of thought, there are entire schools out there to train you for these kinds of things. And yes, there is art classes, but the art classes, they don't necessarily address the psychological side of the artist and how to cope with talent and how to cope with these things. So that's sort of my philosophy on that.
Well, your philosophy jives pretty well with the idea of the brain being a receiver of consciousness. I mean, I'm sure that you're familiar with that theory, right?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Definitely. And, and to build on that, I mean, it's an idea of, it's almost like working a muscle is working that circuitry for that transmitter. And if you have too much of an overload of talent going through that circuitry, your transmitter in your brain, it obviously you fry the circuit. And if I wasn't doing this on the fly, I'd probably make it sound more poetic, but I think you get my point.
Yeah, this makes me wonder then, can creativity be learned? Is it something that everyone has within them? Is everyone capable of receiving that sort of creative transmission, or is this something that's only reserved for a certain type of person?
Questions like that is exactly why there should be an entire school of thought or an entire commission or committee or something that explores things like this, because I don't really have an answer for that. I know that everyone can be creative. I know everybody has the ability to be creative. Of course, I think that's, inherent in every single human being. Now, whether or not you have talent that will actually reshape perception on a small or a large scale, that's something entirely different then. And I'm not entirely sure everyone has that ability. Just like everyone doesn't have the mathematical genius to do a Jack Parsons kind of launching, or the economic genius someone has that they have a preternatural understanding of international finance. I don't think everyone can get to that level. However, everyone can balance their checkbooks, or everyone can be maybe a regional power in real estate or something like that. So I think there's different levels of it. But in terms of really understanding it, I mean, I don't have the answer to that. I don't know.
You had an example or some sort of analogy a few minutes ago about, there's only one lamp and then everything else is a copy of it. I was wondering, for some reason, as soon as you said that, I thought, like, oh shit, like, our human beings may be the same. Maybe there's just one human and then everybody else is just a copy of that one human. Have you ever thought of that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we have, Fibonacci numbers, 55, 144, 233, sacred geometry, all of that. Yeah, it's all a copy, and it's all mathematics. It's all Fibonacci. It's all math. That also gets into cymatics and sound, how you're able to capture different patterns within cymatic sounds depending on the kind of material you use, and why Fibonacci and Fibonacci numbers are prevalent throughout the human body, and why Fibonacci numbers are prevalent throughout basically all of existence. So yeah, it's a print press of everything. So sure, of course, I believe that.
That's a great sort of introduction to your work then, like the actual videos that you've created on YouTube. I know they're private. I know people can't see them right now, but let's talk about the ones that you did create. A lot of the work stems thematically from one idea, and it is the Mandela effect, but even beyond that, it's the idea that we all died in 2012. So I'm really interested in hearing you explain, what brought you to that theory, to that idea, first of all.
Well, first I want to say, as a disclaimer, again, I'm not a citizen journalist. I'm not going to go down a list of facts of why I think we all died in 2012. What I will say is that the idea of dying in 2012, I think, came to me it kind of came to me backwards, and I worked backwards from it. And I got it, and I was wondering if I was going to get this in the comment section. I did. Thousands and thousands of comments I got on this, and it was like, well, if we're dead, well, then why this? If this, then else. If this, then else. And it's, well, if we're dead, then why don't we see people who died before us, or I don't see dead relatives? Or why are babies still being born? And I thought, my God, man, I really stumbled on something really wonderful here. And the idea of being dead in 2012 is so shaking and rattling to people, because what it does is, and why it's so important to really think about that is, I bring it up, what did you expect from the afterlife, and what do you call the afterlife, and what do you call life? Are you entitled to see everyone, the dead relatives and harps and angels, and what is it you expect? As if life, the great reward of life, is all will be revealed in the afterlife, and we'll all be together, and we'll all have it figured out. And I thought, what if we're already here? Okay, we're already gone, and the frustration that we feel in life continues through the afterlife. The frustration of the mundane things that take up 99% of our lives, of waiting in line, of dealing with, your peers, whether it be socially or at work, the frustration of not having your favorite brand of chip whenever you go to the store and knowing there's nowhere else to go because it's 10 o'clock at night or whatever it may be. Just these mundane things, a flat tire in the rain. And I think that if life, for as magical and as miraculous as it is, a lot of it is very mundane, and a lot of it there's a whole lot of nothing happening. And I thought to myself, what if the afterlife is exactly the same way? There isn't, there's so many, and it's so important, and there's so many philosophies built around it. And every single one of those philosophies in some way have something in common in terms of things will be revealed to you. Well, what if there's not? And what if it's already happened? And I thought that was such a playful idea to build on. What a great thing and a thought-provoking thing that would be. I sent you a list of the unlisted videos, and I don't know if I included my Jacob's Ladder one. Throughout film history, they've touched on this, but not really kind of fleshed it out into a kind of usable philosophy. But films like Jacob's Ladder, The Others, things like that, they kind of hint at things like that. But that's what I wanted to sort of kind of spark the conversation about it. And not to mention from there, it became such a rich environment to kind of work in anything else that's relevant right now, such as transhumanism or AI or whatever else it may be at the time. I thought how time travel works. Is the universe against you? Why does the universe have to be for you? And what is the nature of consciousness? Is it only human consciousness? Can things that we considered inanimate or something like that be as conscious or maybe have a greater consciousness than we do? Cymatics. I mean, it got to where I was on such a roll. It was really great.
The videos, they do sort of have this crescendo about them. They just sort of build and build and build. I really enjoy them. And part of the concepts that I really enjoyed, back to the meat of your ideas, it really does hinge on cymatics and knowing, first of all, what cymatics is. So for those of the listeners that don't know, could you maybe give a nice description of what cymatics is and how it plays a role into your theory here?
Sure. Yeah. Cymatics, kind of the short end of it is it's the study of how kind of sound can affect matter and how sound itself may play a bigger role in our material world than we previously thought. And I think if anyone wants to look up cymatics, it's a lot of the intro stuff that's on YouTube is really great stuff, and it really gets you in there. And I think that just as you were looking into, and we started talking about, paracymatics, it's almost limitless with what you can do with cymatics, and it's basically the study of sound. Right now, they're doing experiments on cymatics and how it changes water into these universal patterns, which, by the way, are Fibonacci patterns, or Fibonacci compliant patterns, how it changes sand into all sorts of shapes and patterns that you'll see in nature. And then that started to bring me into the idea of everything is sound. I mean, there's references to how existence was spoken into existence, whether it be biblical or Eastern philosophies or whatever. Most of it is hinging around how powerful sound is. And I think cymatics is our first step toe into that, to where the world around us and the existence that we see around us is a lot less set than you would think it is. And I think that a lot of the military applications they have for sound right now is far more advanced than they're letting on. I have no proof of this. I have to put that out there. I've been called a shill so many times, so I have no inside knowledge that anyone else would have. But I think that the study of sound and the study of sound in ways that it affects the human body, particularly because the human body is mostly water, is far, far more profound than people give it credit for. As I say in my videos, we live in a world of sound, and a world where physical things are depending on tones and frequencies. They change, and they morph, and they become acidic or not. Everything about them changes. And I think that this probably harkens back to ancient times and sort of the math and science that we only get glimpses of that they had back then. So that's sort of a real quick kind of go over of what cymatics is about. But I encourage everyone, get into it. It's a great subject, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, and that's also just the general idea that Tesla talked a lot about when he was alive, was that if you want to know the nature of the universe, think in terms of frequency and vibration. And that's exactly what we're talking about with cymatics. I don't know if the term cymatics was around when he was, but I would consider him the first mainstream scientist to sort of stumble upon that.
Oh yeah, and what you said, absolutely, particularly Tesla. And I think all this is really we finally have a handle. You know, we filled the variable for something that can safely house all these ideas, and we can house it under sort of the idea of the name cymatics now. And it's something where all these different kinds of sciences and theories and everything out there that we can weave together, whether it be hard science, whether it be the occult or anything else, I think it can weave together nicely with this sort of handle that we have, this variable called cymatics now. So yeah, it's kind of a tent top.
Yeah, for sure. Now, in one of your videos, you have this quote where you say, in cymatics, everything is an echo. I thought that was really cool because the way you describe it. This also plays into the Mandela effect, which we haven't really gotten into yet, but there really is a lot of sort of setup to this, and I apologize if we're taking a while to get into it, but I would like you to explain what you mean by everything is an echo and how that does play a role in what we've been talking about with cymatics, and then even the nature of reality and time and subjects like that.
Yeah. And before that, what I wanted to do is to help people understand where I'm coming from. There's a school of thought out there, and it talks about vertical thinking. And mostly everyone on the planet uses this kind of vertical thinking where it's kind of the scientific method where, you know, we have to come to the conclusion and consensus of what is the right answer. Okay? Then there's lateral thinking, which is a newer kind of thinking. And lateral thinking, it comes to the idea that we don't have to come to consensus and there could be many right ideas. And I think some of the friction and some of the frustration and some of the sort of churning that I had in some of the comment sections with them not wrapping their heads around the idea of what if life and death and all of these things isn't what you think it is because you're sort of challenging their ideas of what is the one right idea. Everyone wants the one right idea so they can put it to bed, go home, and forget all about it. And what I'm trying to do, particularly with cymatics and using echoes and things of that nature, is to get more lateral thinking, meaning it's more intuitive based thinking, and that a lot of reasons why a lot of civilizations, they fail and they come and they go is because they get into this pattern of vertical thinking, and where we've got to find the one right answer, or even if we don't, we're going to agree to call that the one right answer. And we're going to hold up the tablet and everyone's going to say that's it, that's doctrine and that's dogma, and then we're going to walk away. And also, by the way, to choke out any kind of creative expression as well, and any dissent as well, you're also only going to use this one method. And never mind that this one method, let's call it the scientific method that we use, that it doesn't even universally work on what we call science nowadays. Now, that's a long way around to the echoes, but I think that I wanted to put that in there to say, just because I talk about something this way doesn't necessarily mean I'm attacking a person's worldview. What I'm saying is that there can be multiple right answers. There doesn't have to be one singular right answer. And particularly with these large, ubiquitous ideas of life and death and the meaning of life and why are we here and, you know, these things going back to the ancients, there's no answer really to any of those things. So it's really kind of an open field where you can question anything and everything. And I think for me, Echoes was a really eloquent way to sort of build on cymatics and build on the idea that we died in 2012. Because the way I tried to put it all together was if you take a calm body of water, like let's say a pond, okay? And let's say you take a rock and you throw it in that pond. And then it disrupts it, and then there's ripples out from that event. The mass extinction event is what I'm talking about when the rock hits. What we are is we're one of those echoes rippling out slowly into dissipation. And as we do, all of the constructs that we've created in terms of belief systems, in terms of thoughts, in terms of economic systems, in terms of linear thinking, all of those things will begin to unravel, and all of those things will begin to dissolve, and we will come to a dissolving consensus. And I think lateral thinking is a great way to sort of understand that right now. And I think part of the frustration a lot of people have with the actual reality we live in is that everyone's looking for that vertical answer, that one right answer. And I think it's either, we're getting too sophisticated to understand that. We all are too opinionated to come to a kind of one right answer, or I don't know what it is, but I think using echoes and sort of as an echo ends, it gets more and more faint. And as it becomes more and more faint, that echo has less control over the sound around it. And I thought, what a great sort of delivery system to kind of get that idea out there.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And you touched on something there about things dissipating as the echo dissipates, and you kind of set that up as the reason that reality itself is becoming stranger. And I thought that was a really good take on it, because I've had casual conversations with people where, we'll be talking about something and then one of us will pause and then we'll just be like, man, like life's really gotten strange, just like the things that are happening in the world, even just on the surface, are just so strange these days. You sort of set that up with a similar explanation, just about how these echoes are dissipating, and that sort of reflects our consciousness doing the same thing. And then that means that everything around us sort of just kind of weakens and then fades. I'm trying to understand, are you saying that process ended in 2012 or that process began in 2012?
Well, one of the reasons why I picked 2012 was because of I don't know if you're familiar with Terence McKenna's work and his time wave zero stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
It basically history ends at 2012. And then obviously there was the whole build-up thing at 2012, and things have gotten steadily weirder since 2012. So I decided to pick 2012 because everything is, and it has. And the Mandela effect has been growing, and whether or not it's mass disbelief or some kind of hysteria, everyone who's whatever sphere you're in, whatever part of the intellectual world or that you're in, whether it's politics, whether it's economics, whether it's whatever you want to call it, the occult, things are getting weird and they're getting strange, and it's getting to where it's no longer, you can't ignore it anymore. So I thought that bringing all of these things together and sort of using that time wave zero philosophy would be kind of a cool way to bring it all together into something coherent and fun and creative. And I think that if you start looking up lateral thinking, horizontal or lateral thinking versus vertical thinking, you'll be able to weather this much better and be able to understand it. Because it's a very bad time for people that want to live in absolutes. This is not your time. If you're someone who lives and dies by absolutes, because I don't know, whatever you want to assign yourself to, those absolutes are probably pretty much gone. The echo is fading and it's dissipating. And whether or not we're in the same kind of life we had or it's something different, I think we all know that something bizarro is happening. It's
interesting that, we've been talking about lateral thinking here for the last few minutes. I didn't know that term before I stumbled across your work, to be honest, but it does remind me of I had a really intimate conversation with a friend recently, and I encouraged her to think more flexibly, because she was kind of stuck in that rut of there's only one way, there's only one answer, that very vertical way that you've been talking about. And I use the term flexible, but I think it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that people they're relying more now on their intuition, and I think that has a lot to do with the survival mechanism, and that could play into, as quote the echo dissipates. That echo a strong echo represents when it was strong, and there were bedrock notions that were unchallengeable, and there were bedrock things that there were third rails everywhere, and you didn't touch that third rail. Well, that's all gone, and it's all dissolved. And that's why I call it dissolving consensus, because it's just not the same. I mean, everything about the world is getting stranger, and it's getting stranger by the minute. So I think that, whatever terminology you start with, I think we're all arriving at the same point. And I think people who are becoming more hostile and more angry, they have yet to sort of grasp this idea that the notions that you had of the way it should be versus the way it is outside of what you think, they're exclusive of one another. And I think one of the most powerful things you could recognize to calm yourself down is that the world and everything else is going to do what it wants to do, regardless of what your morality is, and regardless of what you think is right and wrong, and regardless of how big of a bully pulpit you have and how much you can sort of wrangle people or if you were able to do that, those days are done. And I think that if you can get your head around that, and if you can just accept that, there will be a lot more internal peace. And if you do that, you'll actually start seeing more of these changes, and you'll start seeing the bigger picture and how it's all happening. Now, I don't have a holistic reason why this is going on. I mean, like I said, I use the power of now. I don't believe in the future. I don't believe in the past. I only believe in right now. And this isn't some new agey hippy dippy thing. This is a series of exercises I use as coping mechanisms for the world around me, and as my life, as I explore adulthood, and as my life gets stranger and everyone else's life around me gets stranger, I use this power of now as a kind of practical method for sort of living in this world. And I think part of that frustration is everyone is so just strung up about the future. What are we going to do in the future, and what about the future? And I think that, the future we created in our own minds. You will never go to the future. No one, and understand that, no one is ever going to go to the future. You have never been to the future. I've never been to the future. No one has ever gone to the future, and no one ever will, because there's only now. During now, you have a series of cycles that take place. And that's fine. You can observe those, but you're still now. You're still in the now, and you're still here right now. And if you let your mind create scenarios that will never come to be, or at least not exactly like you look, whatever scenario you think is going to happen, it's not going to happen that way. It may happen in a version of what you may think, but it's not going to happen exactly the way you think. And ultimately, what you're doing is wasting your own energy and your own time worrying about something that doesn't exist, and that's the future. And I think the future is probably, other than science, and that deals mostly with the future, is the dominant philosophy, it's the dominant government, the dominant religion of the planet. We live in a theocracy of futurism, and everything else is a subset of that. Whether you're talking about Christianity or something else, it's all subset based on the future. And that has a lot to do with particularly Western religions having a linear time concept of there's a past, there's a present, and there's a future. And that has a lot to do with maintaining control through guilt of the past, or maintaining control through fear and guilt of the future. And a lot of that is fear and guilt based. And I think that a lot of the occult philosophies are out there that try to free people of fear and guilt and things like that. They are put down by the larger linear time-based religious philosophies, because that frees your mind up to think of other things rather than, worrying constantly about the future and thinking constantly about the past. So it's a very metaphysical thing for me.
Yeah, I'm definitely on board with the power of now. It's something that, like you just alluded to, it's an idea that was sort of reinforced to me through my studies of occult philosophy that is still very new to me just in the last few years of my life. But about the future, this is not anything earth-shattering here for me, but personally, I've seen and met and know several people who spend so much of their time now worrying about hypothetical scenarios that aren't real, just situations they create in their mind, and it leads to distress and disease, or dis-ease as I like to call it now. This power of now, it also leads into a nice conversation about something else that you're interested, the nature of time, which you were alluding to there with your talk about how religions have this linear timeline that they sort of shove down everybody's throat with their dogma. But I think before I want to talk about that, I want to go back to the 2012 topic just for a moment, because there was an event in 2012 that happened that received worldwide news coverage, and it was something that I was working for a newspaper at the time, and I wrote a column about this event, and it was the discovery of the Higgs boson particle by CERN. And you've talked about this before. I'm curious how you think this may play a role in what happened in 2012.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a journalist, and I'm not here to present myself as a an expert. This is just my philosophy on this. I know with a lot of science, it's kind of it's an authoritarian approach to science. Those scientists, they know best, and it's really more powerful than government. I know a lot of people go on about the monetary system, and I can appreciate that, but I really think that science is a very it's very much an authoritarian system, and the fact that you hear about it all the time. There were dissenting, voices whenever they let off the first atomic bomb. They had no idea what they were going to do. They had no idea what it was going to do to the planet. And yet, we supposedly live in a democracy, but we had no vote in whether or not they were going to set that thing off. And not to mention, we had no vote of the ramifications of what was going to happen in the future of what was going to happen. And science has done that. It has free reign. It's completely arrogant. And it's an authoritarian system. And it also is so concerned with the future. Note that. It's always about the future with science. And yet, it claims to be the authority, but if you take scientists and science, what it believed 100, 200, 300 years ago, we now know that's gibberish for the most part. Victorian science is gibberish for what that we understand what science is now. All we're doing is continuing to clean up the fallout of science constantly. So that's why I say technology, oftentimes, all it is the pollution of science that they sell to us as advancement. The technology that we get to better our lives, they find that by accident, most of it. It's an incidental thing. And it's usually only used for a military application that they sort of figure out a way to monetize, and then we finally get it whenever they've moved on to something more advanced. So science itself is malevolent for the most part, and I think that, yes, you can look at medicine and you can look at all these other things, but a lot of that is caused by the environment from fallout from science. And I think that I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? I get really worked up with science, so.
Yeah, I had just asked you about CERN and the Higgs boson particle, and then that set you off on that.
Yeah, no, okay, so anyway, they found it. They found it in 2012. And I think something like that and finding something like that, eventually science is going to find something that's going to react to their findings. And I thought, what a perfect thing, the God particle, or, it was the non-God particle, as some people joked. Eventually CERN or another organization is going to dig too deep, and they're gonna accidentally do a Fukushima, only it's going to be on the fabric of existence. It's going to happen eventually. And I thought, everything that was going on in 2012, maybe the surgeons cut too deep, particularly with finding this particle, and particularly since things have gotten steadily weirder since then. Obviously, I have no proof, and I can't say that enough. So, but I just thought, what is it about this, and why spend decades and decades and decades looking for this, and spend untold, who knows how much money's really been spent, and now we're starting to hear about colliders popping up all over the place, and China's set to build them, one of the biggest ones yet. And there has to be a lot more applications than what they proclaim it to be. Their stance at CERN is that we knew since World War II we had a lot of these scientists, and they were really smart, but they did mischievous things. So what we want to do is have them be able to do something that is not that won't have a military application. I mean, really, there's no way that I can be convinced that something like that is happening, and that there's not some sort of military application in mind for this. There just isn't. Anytime that especially if you want to get to the level where you openly admit that you're looking for either the Big Bang or how reality itself is structured, or if you want to get really funky, where they talk about all online, depending on what channel you go to, they talk about finding portals and black holes, and you can run the gamut. If a tenth of this is true, there's obvious military applications to this. I mean, obviously, that's what I think about, the Higgs boson and all that.
So is time itself, or what most people would consider time, however they want to describe it, could time itself, or the idea of time that they've sort of shoved down our throats, could that also have some sort of military application? Because I've seen you describe time as a monetary construct, so obviously there's some interest in it from a financial perspective, which usually can tie those two things into the same monster,
Yeah, no, time. It's time. The way in which time is taught to us is only taught to us to monetize us, 9-to-5 job. You buy insurance for the future. You buy medical insurance for the future, and you worry about time, and you stick with the job, and you work the better part of the day and the better part of your life preparing for a future where you're going to be old, and then what money you have collected will be spent in your golden years as you die with incredibly expensive medical equipment in which you're going to die anyway. So it's a system where it's been created that you are born, you're going to work your entire life. Then when you're ready to retire, you will get sick eventually, which is pretty soon after retirement. Let's say you get a good run in it. Let's say it's 20 to 25 years after retirement. And the long span of a life, that's a relatively short period of time, particularly because it's not your best years. These aren't, your years where you're physically strong. These are years where you're breaking down. And during that process, all of your savings will be depleted through what? Through science, through worrying about medicine and the advances that medicine always, promises us and really doesn't deliver on. And that's why I'm so a little skeptical on transhumanism, but I still think it's a really cool idea simply because I like stuff like that. But I think if anything, time, and at best it could probably be used as a resource like you would oil, and it could be manipulated like you could anything else in the physical world, and you could eventually maybe metal it out like you would a bonus or a paycheck or something. That I could particularly see that possibly happening. But even then, what you're really talking about is the present. And what you're talking about is an expansion of everyone's present and how you're able to perceive it. But it's not really that you're given more time. It's just an expression. It's an expansion of your present and what you're able to perceive in it. And I think that's what they're really looking for. And I think once they find how, a lot of people call that like the lifting of the veil, I've heard. And, I've heard that. I don't know how you would refer to it too, but the present right now is I'm in a room with four walls, or I can walk outside and I can see trees. Well, maybe you could monetize it where you could see or you could experience something in the present that is wider than what you have. And in that way, you've enriched your life. So when your life is at its end, you had a bigger life, and I could see them monetizing that and monetizing your experiences and using that as a new kind of resource that they're probably mining for potentially. Of course, this is all speculation. But yeah, if you could take your present and your existence right now and be able to see past, the electromagnetic spectrum and the spectrum of light and be able to experience distances immediately and what we might call teleportation or just see or understand something in your mind, in your third eye or whatever it may be, and monetize that and say, well, if you have enough money, you can have this kind of experience or have it all the time.
Isn't that sort of what virtual and augmented reality is?
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. And that could be one way to do it. I think it's a bit artificial. I think it was some TED Talk where they were talking about they've gotten down to such a level to where it's basically binary code. Like the fabric of existence itself is almost like binary code, ones and zeros. And it would be a far more enriching experience if you could change that code. Obviously, I would think for the good, but obviously it's not going to happen that way. But if you could change that kind of code so people could see more and experience more and have a more meaningful existence, that would be better. Or, you're right, have that and then as another quiet project and then sort of satisfy everyone else with this augmented reality in terms of virtual reality and hooking into your brain and giving you an experience that isn't real. So,
yeah.
But what is really, right? So, who am I to judge?
You said something a few minutes ago that kind of made me do a double take. You brought up transhumanism and you said that you've enjoyed that idea, and I've always been sort of against it. It seems like it's combining man and machine for, I guess, more time, right? To sort of live longer. It always seems like that sort of went against the natural order of things here on Earth. I've always personally thought that I die when I die, and I don't want to prolong my life in any way. But then I get caught in sort of a catch-22 where I'm like, well, I'm also like doing what I can to take care of myself now and like eat healthy and meditate and do yoga and things like that. So that prolongs my life, you know? So I'm not really sure what you mean exactly by transhumanism, if it's the same interpretation of what I have where it's just a combination of man and AI. But you say that that idea excites you. Why does that?
Well, it excites me I probably should have said for a couple of reasons. One, because of it's yet another kind of promise that's being made. You see what I'm saying? That science is yet making another promise. And this is the ultimate promise. It never really delivers on the promises that it always makes. At least everything that science has given us has been, like I said, sort of, a lot of times it's been for military applications, and then they decide to demilitarize it and send it out to the civilian world. And that's only because they wanted better productivity, you know, like the internet and everything. But for transhumanism, it's yet another promise, like promises were made 100 years ago of living forever. This is yet the next amusing promise to me of having, you know, to upload your consciousness or your soul or whatever to the cloud and all of that. If you really listen to all of that, one day these scientists are literally going to take your soul and let you be immortal and upload you to a cloud. They literally call it a cloud. I mean, to me that is so amusing and so fun, yeah. And it's so creative that I think it's very amusing. However, I do understand that, you know, a lot of the organic technology and a lot of the 3D printing that's out there is very real. And I think for me, so it's kind of a dual thing that I come at it with, is that one side of it, it's the folly that science is yet throwing another kind of whammy on the public where, you know, they're going to believe it if they take a certain set of pills or whatever certain set of nanobots that they let go into their blood system, or this CRISPR thing where they're able to alter their DNA. And there's always the promise of something like this, and it never really, I mean, this goes back to even the 20s when they were talking the earlier forms of like eugenics. They were talking these things, and it always turns out to be a disaster. But you know what? They do this, they roll something out new, and they do it every 100 years or so. So I guess this is that sort of, I think it's W.G. Gann who talks about different financial cycles, and he applied those cycles to human beings, and you could almost use the finance markets to kind of predict through cycles, not a linear, you know, time passage, but a circular cycle. I think it was W.G. Gann, and he was able to predict when bad things were going to happen through the financial markets, and that's a whole other topic that's incredibly interesting, particularly if you believe in a cycled version of reality versus a linear. But
I think you should go into that if you want, because that is something that I think is relevant to this conversation.
Oh, sure, yeah. There's plenty of people who wrote lots of books about Gann. I'm trying to look on my shelf. I don't have it in front of me. I should have prepared for that. I didn't expect to bring that up. But yeah, in finance, they absolutely know of patterns. They know of cycles, there's definitely cycles in behavior. You know, that's why they have psychology and economics. And yeah, absolutely. Human beings, they repeat cycles over and over again. I think there are 20, 40, 100-year cycles. And a lot of that you can play through the market. That goes with Fibonacci as well, depending on what size of the cycle that you want to look on. There's like 55-minute cycles, 144-minute cycles, 233-minute cycles, a day, a week. Then it goes all the way into decades. And these cycles repeat, and they repeat over and over again in finance and in the markets. I mean, it's not a coincidence that they literally have a monetary vehicle. They call it futures. I mean, that's not by accident.
Yeah.
Right. And the way derivative markets work, particularly whenever you have puts and calls, I mean, it's the perfect way to protect yourself against those things. You buy a stock, and everyone who buys stock, they buy a stock and they think, okay, they need the market to perpetually go up. What they don't tell you is that there's also these things called puts, and these puts are basically what they are. They're shorting the market, and they're making sure and they bet against the market. Well, no one really who buys a stock, for the most part, knows that they have puts out there, and these puts can be put against the stock as an insurance policy in case the stock doesn't go up. So if the stock tanks, you can make money off of shorting that stock as well. And a lot of hedge funds do that, where they play both sides of the market. And all of this is based off of cycles.
Man, that's a great explanation. And yeah, we weren't prepared to to bring that up, but still, I think that's a fascinating anecdote to this conversation. So thanks for explaining that. And back to transhumanism for just a moment, just to tie up that point. If the goal of transhumanism is to sort of cheat death, but in your theory, we've already died and we're in the afterlife, what is the goal of transhumanism in this afterlife then? What are they trying to cheat now?
Well, in one of my talks, I was playful about it, but I was talking about, you're going to upload yourself into the cloud outside of the echo. There it is. We're going to get out of here. We're going to go in the cloud. We're not going to wait for the echo to dissipate. We're going to upload our consciousness to the cloud, and everything's going to be A-okay. And again, they're not trying to align their philosophy with me. So, I have to align my philosophy with their philosophy. So,
you don't have to. You could just create your own, and it just aligns with yourself.
And that's a lot of it too with us being dead. It was more of an exploration exercise than anything else. But I think that there are some funny things happening with, we talked about it with reality and existence and how it's perceived, and there's some really strange things going on right now. So yeah.
Absolutely, man. Back to time real quick too. I was going to ask you if you've seen that movie In Time with Justin Timberlake.
I'm trying to remember. Is that where you buy the time and you have it on your arm?
Yeah. Time is like currency in that film, and that just the way that you were describing it, that's what it reminded me of.
Yeah, and you could do something like that for present, the never-ending present. Rather than having more time or whatever, you could use that currency to experience the present in ways that other people could never experience it. In a lot of ways, we do that now with expensive hotels versus cheap hotels, or expensive cars versus cheap cars. It's a perfect metaphor for that. It's all the very wealthy people, they get the very best, and they get to be safe, and they get to live in a part of town where they can have private security force, let alone a police force that backs them, because they support the tax base for everyone else. So imagine doing that for the present. Or if you want to if you think I'm totally out of my mind, sure, yeah, you could do that absolutely for a linear-based time belief. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the other things that fascinates me about time is this idea of time travel. And if the future doesn't exist, then you can't travel to it. The past, I think, probably does exist, or maybe the past doesn't exist. I don't know. But I had a guest on previously that described time to me, or time travel rather, to me as resonance travel, where each event that's already sort of unfolded in time has its own specific frequency and vibration, and that if you can dial into that, like maybe psychically or maybe artificially with some sort of machine, perhaps some sort of AI, that you could travel to that event in time. And I'm using time in quotation marks here, but you could travel to that resonance point. And that goes back to our, what laid the foundation for this conversation and talking about cymatics and sound and the true, perhaps, nature of our universe. And I was just wondering if you ever heard that explanation for time travel, that it's more resonance travel and being to travel from, frequency to frequency.
Yeah, one of the unlisted videos I have right now addressed it exactly like that, actually. That's really that's great. That's, talk about synchronicity. I explain it as a recreation of echoes. And and that's how I put it. But yeah, I like that way too. You recreate the conditions in which those echoes existed, and you could absolutely go back to that point, and you could experience it. And given that I don't know how the functions of the present work, that by you altering those echoes, would you affect the present? Do echoes ripple in time? And I don't know that, but I absolutely believe that you could take, regardless of how you want to, the vocabulary you want to use, but you can erect a series of echoes, and that, and suddenly you're in, 1947 or whatever it may be, and you are there. You can, the sights, the smells, the sounds, everything, a wet sidewalk you could smell, you could hear air and tree rustling and the whole thing, and you are there. And I totally believe that's possible. Absolutely. Now, that isn't exactly like time travel like it's presented in, where you're physically like, you're going to get into some sort of spaceship or whatever, and you actually physically go back there. I don't believe in that, but yeah, that's great. That's great. Someone else thinks that way.
Well, he was a former contractor for some government facilities out in New Mexico, Los Alamos, and what was the other one? Sandia Labs. So he wrote this novel based on his experiences doing this work and the sorts of research that they were doing out there. And so his novel is basically a novel of ideas built on his own experiences, and that's one of the ideas in there. So, is there some actual validity to it? Well, apparently the military industrial complex thinks there is, and they've been researching it and pouring millions of our own tax dollars into it. So yeah, like we've been saying, the reality just keeps getting stranger, doesn't it? Which brings us, I think, to the Mandela effect on some level, because this is like sort of the trendy search term that probably a lot of people discover your work through, I would imagine, because it has become sort of its own cultural phenomena, so to speak. It's not necessarily mainstream, and I don't hear people on CNN talking about it. I also don't listen to CNN, so I'm not sure if they do. But this idea, first of all, I'm assuming that most listeners are familiar with it on some level, but I always assume that there are some that don't know what it is at all. So you maybe just describe this phenomenon that's sort of taken the internet by storm in the last few years.
Okay. The Mandela effect on its surface is memories that people have, personal memories, and then memories that we have in popular culture. When we go back and we go to look at artifacts like a movie or something like that, they have changed from what our memories are. One of the most popular ones that are out there is the Tom Hanks movie, Forrest Gump, where he says, life is like a box of chocolates. Everyone remembers that. And now everybody who is Mandela affected, they believe that they remember it as life is like a box of chocolates. The way it is in the movie is life was like a box of chocolates. The same thing with Mirror, Mirror on the Wall is now Magic Mirror on the Wall. Luke, I am your father is now No, I am your father. And that's really just the real basic kind of 101 top level sort of scratch the surface of what the Mandela effect is. When you get deeper into the Mandela effect, you start seeing that, and a lot of this I don't hold as much validity to because I understand advertising changes. A lot of people really get worked up over product changes and the spelling of different products and the way products that they remembered in the past, how they've changed. So you have an entertainment component, you have a commercial component to it, and then the one that bothers me just as much as the entertainment component are geographical changes. One of the most famous and one is that South America has moved over and used to be south of America, and it's not. It's the absolute west coast of South America now is basically just below Florida. And at one point, many people believed that South America was literally that. It was south. It was under Mexico and the U.S. And that the way in which Central America goes from east to west used to go more. It was more north to south. And also that Australia, one of the more popular ones, is Australia used to be a lot farther out and by itself rather than closer to Papua New Guinea. And also to New Zealand used to be in a different place. And a lot of people claim that there was another island, not as big as Australia, but it was substantial, and it was somewhere near or in the Indian Ocean, and that's gone now. Also, too, a lot of people remember there being a North Pole and that it was frozen. And now the North Pole is somewhere in Alaska, and none of the maps or none of the older globes has a North Pole or has a permanent, ice glacier or whatever you want to call it. That's gone. Those I think are I find the most fascinating, but I'm no expert with anything like that. I have my personal memory. A lot of things with the Mandela effect, they are patterns where people's names were once plural or they had an S at the end of the name, are now singular or they have no S at the end of the name, such as Sally Field. I remember her as Sally Fields. That was a big deal, and it was a big deal because my mom was a fan of Sally Fields, so growing up, we always watched her movies. Anything she was in, we would watch with her. So I specifically remember Sally Fields. And whether it was even, the Flying Nun or Gidget or whatever it was, she was always around in our house, and I remember that name. And so that was very strange for me and started to get me interested in it. And then her famous Oscar speech, you like me, you really, really like me. There's a lot of what people in the Mandela effect community call residue, where other people like Jim Carrey in The Mask, where he means that, saying you like me, you really, really like me. And she never said that now. Now she's saying, you like me now, you like me now, or something like that. It's something that doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, too, with the Mandela effect, and this is the more disturbing and something that I haven't experienced, is personalities of those around them, coworkers or even loved ones, which is more disturbing, that they've become different people. Their values, their morals, their approach to life, everything about them has changed. Or even the most disturbing, I've only heard about this, is family members have gone missing. And people have gone mad trying to, go from family member to family member saying, I had this number of children or I had this number of siblings, and the family doesn't remember this person. So it goes from whatever I've experienced, from the very odd and strange and kind of a head scratching thing, to where I think it's very, very interesting, all the way deep down to where it's very disturbing.
Yeah, that would be disturbing. I hadn't heard of that last part there that you were just talking about in terms of people going missing and personalities changing. And I've done a lot of, reading and listening to other people talk about things like, mind control. That could be the cause of personality changes. And I've seen a lot of other stories about, people disappearing, just maybe being abducted by the military industrial complex, So there could be some other explanations that are, maybe not as paranormal as to why those sorts of things are happening. But to the events that most people may be familiar with in terms of the entertainment stuff, with the Star Wars line, the Forrest Gump line, the Berenstein thing, which is what turned me on to this whole thing. Those sorts of things do have a seemingly paranormal or supernatural aspect to them. What are some of the other explanations that you've seen out there that you're aware of as to why this phenomenon may be occurring to begin with?
Well, I mean, the big one out there is CERN. Goes back. A lot of people believe it's CERN. That's the big one, and that one you'll get about 90% of. And by the way, there are Mandela affected communities on Facebook. Most of them are private, where people can go and they sort of describe it as a condition or an affliction that they have, and they, particularly people who have the more severe conditions of, and they call it ME, who have ME. They have groups out there to help them cope with losing a family member, or people saying a particular set of events didn't happen. So I wanted to just throw that out there. I'm not a member of any of those. I'm aware of them, and I'm sympathetic to people who think or who know in their minds that they lost someone this way. But anyway, the big theory that's out there is CERN. And, they did a rip in time, or CERN sort of has this secondary purpose to what it states publicly, and that there's some video out there with CERN where someone, one of the scientists, he has a billboard with like Bond and some other words, and then he has Mandela on it. And it's a playful video that CERN put out there. And a lot of people take that as, they take offense to the video because they think that CERN changed the past and has been tinkering with the past to see how it would affect the present time. And they're almost putting it in people's faces that they are making these changes, and that they're acknowledging they make the changes. Particularly how it all started out with is is Nelson Mandela. Apparently a whole swath of the planet believes he died in the 80s in jail. Another swath, like me, they remember him going on to be the South African president and dying recently here. And I don't remember, it was 2012, 2013, something like that. So that's where it began with. And the fact that the CERN video, and it's a dated video, it's an older video, it's not something that came out in like the last year or the last 6 months or something. The fact that video had this particular scientist holding up a placard that says Mandela, it's almost as if a lot of people kind of put those two things together, that they were the ones that did this. Now, I do have to say that this all began with a personality named, I believe it's Fiona Broome, who first, I believe she coined the phrase. And if she didn't coin the phrase, she certainly brought it sort of into the zeitgeist. And from there, and I believe that was well before 2012, but from there it's been growing more and more and more. I think what really trips people up is particularly the entertainment things and the things that they remember from their childhood, like, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall versus Magic Mirror. Oh, and then there's a whole entire section of Christians. They believe that the Mandela effect is changing the Bible. And I follow a lot of those channels on YouTube because I just find that so fascinating. And these are people who are passionate about understanding the Bible. And, there's things I even remember about the Bible, with the Lord's Prayer changing. and then with the lions laying down with the lamb, and now it's the wolf lay down with the lamb, and there's all kinds of other, and they're almost finding them daily from the King James version, particularly the Christian community. There's a huge community of, so you have disparate communities reacting in different ways and growing in different ways to this thing. And if it's a psyop, then it's a great psyop because it's working.
Well, that's the problem too with, digitizing everything in the cloud, is that it can be changed. It can be manipulated.
Yeah.
If the Bible doesn't exist as a physical book anymore and most people just read it through an app or as an ebook, then anybody could go in there and change the text of it at any point. So there are some, more logical explanations, I think, for those sorts of things. And it is intriguing that it is sort of affecting people who may not otherwise believe in these sorts of supernatural occurrences, for example.
Yeah, and I think for me, why the Christian one for me is so fascinating is that these are people who are just brand new to anything alternative or anything conspiratorial, and they're interested in nothing else. And as far as the digital, why the Christian thing too is also very interesting to me is that a lot of them are talking about physical Bibles, not digital. And they make the claims that their old King James version has changed, as in the words in the physical page. Right. So those I find the most fascinating, particularly people who have studied the Bible and it's very much a part of their lives. And they're so passionate, But everything else, like you're talking about, absolutely, they could have digitally changed every copy of a particular movie. That is completely within the realm of possibility. Sure, that's sure.
Well,
but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just say I'm wondering if there's somebody out there that, for example, has an old VHS copy of Forrest Gump or Star Wars and compares it to like a newer, DVD or Blu-ray of it or a digital copy of it to see if it really has changed.
Yeah, there's lots of stories like that. Who they take out their old VCR, they dust it off, they plug it into an old TV, and it has changed. So particularly, like I heard the one story of I think it was DVD. I don't think it was VHS, but it was a video where the person was talking about, it changed to life was like a box of chocolates versus life is like a box of chocolates. And then if you will build it, he will come versus if you build it, they will come. I think it's Field of Dreams. I didn't see that movie. I'm just saying it's a lot. So I don't know. I don't have any memories of that. But there are entire people who claim that if you take a VHS or you take an older DVD version, that it too has changed. But I can't prove that. I don't, so.
Yeah, that's just curious. I've not looked up any videos like that, but I mean, if I have that thought, I'm sure there are many others that have, obviously. So, yeah, and I don't have any VHS tapes anymore. That's the problem, too, with this whole transhumanism approach, is that we get rid of all of these tangible things that we grew up with. For example, like people our age grew up with VHS tapes, we grew up with cassette tapes, we grew up with actual physical books, and we're getting rid of them all. They're being replaced by things, and then who knows what the Bible's going to read like in 50 years.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. But there is one interesting one. And again, I'm just bringing this up. I'm saying that I believe this particular one. There's the one with, I think it's, with Sinbad. And there's an entire group of Mandela affected people who believe that he was in some sort of movie. I think it was called,
Shazam.
That's it. That's the one. There it is. Yeah. So there's so many disparate components to this thing. So, and that's why I find it so fascinating versus other conspiracy theories. People who are conspiracy theory minded are going to be in it. JFK, the whole, just whatever it may be. They'll be conspiracy minded and open to conspiracies. This thing, I've never experienced anything like this where you have people who never even wanted to hear about this are getting hysterical over changes over the Bible and things like that. There was one video I saw of a pastor, it was months and months ago. He started breaking down and crying because he knew his Bible had changed. And this was him talking to his parishioners. So this really mattered to him, and he believed that this was happening. So pretty amazing. It's pretty astonishing if you go through some of the videos there, particularly in the last two years or so. It seems to be, and that's another thing, it seems to be picking up in the changes to where there's entire philosophies now, right? They call them old earthers versus new earthers. They think that we switched from an old version of Earth and now we're in a new version of Earth, and we did it sometime around 2012. Obviously, I'm in the mix saying that we all died, but my stuff is a bit more tongue-in-cheek. However, I mean, it's possible, but there are people, there are diehards who truly believe that we're on a new version of Earth, and that we changed, I think, from the Orion. I think it's the. I don't want to say this wrong because it's the Orion spur, and now we're in the Sagittarius side of things, and we've changed our sort of galactic position in the universe, and they believe that we switched. So there's all kinds of camps out there in believing what happened, but a lot of people believe it has something to do with CERN and D-Wave and quantum computing and things of that nature.
I think, too, what this does is, if you experience it, or if you have experienced it, it forces you to really consider the nature of your own reality and how it may be. I think the term that I've used down here before that you see in the occult is it's mutable, it's transmutable, it's transformable. And I think this effect is starting to prove that to a lot of people. And it's almost like that it's a forced consideration or a forced reconsideration. Whereas, if you studied something like the occult on your own, you would come to this sort of realization through the works that you've exposed yourself to. But then there's the flip side where this effect and things like it are sort of forcing people to consider it, like sort of against their will almost.
Yeah, and that's a great distinction you made there, and for me too. I'll readily and openly admit I probably wouldn't have started my YouTube channel if it wasn't for the Mandela effect and it affecting me in terms of me really reconsidering, because I would have never thought of that. What if the world ended? What if we all died in 2012? And I would have never put Terence McKenna's work together with him saying that history ends in 2012, and everything started to come to my mind. And the Higgs boson was 2012, and putting all these random things together. I can honestly tell you, if it wasn't for the Mandela effect and me remembering these things a certain way, all the way from my childhood to my adulthood, and it really shaking me up, I would have never considered doing anything that I'm doing. So it's changed me. So again, if this is a psyop and it's true, and they're tracking with whatever it is they do, yeah, I'm changed, and I am. It makes you reconsider the fabric of your reality. It makes you rethink of life, death, and everything else in the middle, and it really does change you. It's changed me. I freely admit that. And yeah, this wasn't something that I sought out. This was something that was forced on me. This was something that I didn't seek out or even want. I think for me, I feel blessed that I have the tool set that I already had in place of things like the power of now, of my understanding of the nature of existence already, it being kind of a little less structured than a lot of people who are dealing with this, and they're not dealing quite as well with it. And I think that I may have had a better tool set mentally to deal with this than a lot of people I'm seeing online who become hysterical over it.
Yeah, and to go back to that point that you made about what Terence McKenna said, I've been playing a lot recently with words and language, and I just had this thought while you were talking about him and what he said, history ends in 2012, and I've seen some great interpretations of history as a word, and some people break it down into two words and say his story, which is a sort of external third person account of something. And now we're talking about the Mandela effect after 2012, or maybe shortly before that it started. And we're talking about a real mystery, which I've seen people break down into my story. And yeah, so it makes me just sort of wonder, like, we have undergone some sort of transition, obviously. I don't think there's any debate about that. There's some sort of humanistic transition here, whether it's specific to human beings or if it's an Earth thing or a universe thing, I don't know. But I do think that, you see this online. If you're on YouTube watching people talk all the time or listening to podcasts, then you will stumble on people talking about being awake, being conscious now. And what that does is it sort of reintroduces yourself to yourself and brings back that individuality, that spirituality that we've been lacking. And that's where the his story versus my story really starts to intrigue me, is that this transition maybe it was about someone else or something else previously, but now it's about each individual's story. And that to me is maybe a more spiritual way to look at this whole phenomenon that's been occurring since 2012 or roughly thereabout, is that we've undergone this transition from it being about external authorities to now it's just about us as individuals and focusing on our own path and our own journey. I was a long tangent there, and I'm sorry, but it just seems like that is sort of what we're talking about in terms of maybe from if you go beyond fear and conspiracy and those things that are really just meant to sort of control you and keep you in order, it's about reclaiming that chaos, which I know is an idea that you're familiar with. You've talked about that. I've talked about that recently too, about sort of reclaiming your spirit, which is chaotic in nature, and that the universe at large is chaotic. So I think this is all just sort of starting to tie together for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that if you watch a lot of mainstream news and things of that nature, you'll see a lot of chaos, and you'll see a lot of people that are very upset for one reason or another. And I think that that's all part of this, and I think that that's a part of kind of tying this back, that the crumbling of what is the truth, and the crumbling of this vertical thinking, and the crumbling of all of these older ideas. And this is cyclical too, and that's why I'm suspicious that CERN did something malevolent to us, that to where they're manipulating the past. How do we know that the Mandela effect, this isn't a natural occurrence that happens? This isn't a natural transition that happens. It happens all the time, perhaps. We don't know that. So I think that if we can accept things where through intuition and using other tools that we've abandoned so long ago, and that's, I think, is one of the nefarious natures of science, where it even incorporated its own religion called materialism, where anything outside the physical world is basically, hocus pocus. I think if we can reincorporate some of those tools that we lost long ago into this, I think we'll be better equipped to understand what's happening. And I think that we'll have a better understanding of what's happening. And that way you can better embrace chaos, and you can better embrace, the fact that the foundations in which that you were brought up with in terms of how things are going to play out, they may not play out the way in which that you think or you think should be. There's this movie called The Counselor, and at the end of the movie, the main character, he's trying to set up a drug deal, and he's a lawyer, and it went horribly wrong. And it's just this brilliant speech at the end of the movie where the drug lord is explaining to him about his loved one being dead. And he's trying to explain it to him is that you're not letting go, and that there's this subjective world. And I'm probably butchering it to death, so please go see the movie. It's a wonderful movie, and the end justifies the rest of the movie's not very eventful, but the end and the speech was so powerful. And he talks about, the pain you're feeling is it's your ego not letting go with the reality of the situation that has already happened. It's already there and it already exists. And the only by you bargaining with me, still after I've already told you that these events have taken place, is you bargaining with yourself and you being upset with yourself, and that the world itself is going to move on regardless of what you think. And the world is going to do what it's going to do regardless of what you want. And to find peace with yourself, you're going to have to stop arguing with yourself. You're going to have to just stop that conversation in your head. Silence your head. Embrace mindlessness. I was always brought up to be mindful, and it was the worst thing ever. The best thing ever is to be mindless. Let go of those scenarios. Let go of those arguments you have in your head, and just let there be silence for a while. And just live right now in the now. And even if you can only do it 5 minutes a day, do it for yourself. And that wasn't part of the movie. That was me just dovetailing into my own how I try to live. But it's such a powerful scene in the movie, and it was really cool. And I think it probably one of the greatest scenes I've ever seen in movie history.
Well, and I'm right there with you, man, in terms of being mindless. We've always been told that losing your mind is a bad thing, but when you really study how the mind works, losing it is a freeing and quite liberating thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree. The best thing I've ever, the best compliment I ever paid to myself is saying, you know what, I'm going to just be quiet for a little while in my head and just stop. You know, that's the greatest gift you can give to yourself. Not a vacation, not a physical place to take yourself to. And, you know, I'm not trying to sound new agey or wishy-washy. I mean, these are hard survival skills that I'm trying to communicate. And these are hard skills that you could teach yourself to where you can live more at peace and possibly, avoid disease, avoid a lot of self-inflicted trauma. You know, it doesn't have to be new agey. You can toss out part of the power of now where it gets, spiritual, and just go with the mental exercises where you physically work on shutting down your brain, and it does such wonders. It's such a wonderful thing to do for a treat for yourself. It's better than a day at the spa.
For sure, man. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a good point to wrap up on. Is just that a lot of people out there, I think, are clinging to the ideas of what they want things to be like instead of just letting go and embracing the way things are. They're sort of clinging to their own personal order,
yes,
instead of just embracing the way things are, which is quite chaotic, and just kind of turning themselves over to that process. Chaos doesn't necessarily, it's not negative, it's just random, it's just unknown, it's just, there is no order. And that, I think, it goes back to the idea of vertical thinking versus lateral thinking, is that vertical is very orderly, it's very sort of laid out for you step by step, whereas lateral is, like I said, flexible. It's sort of this elusive way of thinking where you're not tied to one specific philosophy, for example, or one specific outcome to a certain situation. It's just sort of, you just kind of make of things as they come. And I think hopefully that's a good way to sort of wrap this up. So this has been a great conversation, man. I do appreciate your time, but we got to get out of here. SMQ, tell people where they can find your work, please.
Oh, sure. On YouTube, you can look me up as SMQ. That's where I mostly play. If you want to check me out on Twitter, that would be great. I'm at AI_SMQ. And those are really the two places that my public facing places where I'm at. And I would appreciate everybody stopping by and checking out my videos.
I would recommend they do the same. And by the way, congratulations. We should have mentioned this, that you had a short film just accepted into a very prestigious independent film festival.
Yeah. It was one of the videos that I took off of that I took private. I went ahead and I sent it into a series of film festivals, and yeah, it's an official selection of the London Independent Film Awards for 2017. So it was shocking, and it was the best thing ever, and I totally didn't expect it. I just knew that I had all of these videos where I started using visuals on private, and I just didn't know what to do with them. And I've taken them off private, as you know, and I now have them where you have to have the link, and I'm not sharing them with the public, but certainly eventually, if this thing goes farther in other film festivals, or certainly even with the selection, I'll eventually probably let it go public again, let people watch it.
Good luck with that. And again, thanks for your time. Regardless of the nature of it, I do appreciate it. And it's been really nice chatting with you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Fucking-zam. My thanks again to SMQ. Check out the links to his work in the show notes if you want more of his sweet, sweet philosophical action. A lot of great stuff in there. I particularly enjoyed the bits about creativity and art as magic and the muses. As someone who fancies himself as a creative and an artist from time to time, I often forget that I don't have to be communing with spirits directly to perform magic, and that things I do regularly, like writing or even podcasting, is itself an act of creation and is thus magic. Although the whole conscious communing with spirits thing probably does enhance the art, but that's what the muse is anyway. It's a spirit transmitting a message to you that you ultimately put out into the world in the form of a book or a film or a painting or a rather pedestrian fringe podcast. And then there's this whole 2012 thing. And let's get the Mayan calendar horse shit out of the way, because every time 2012 comes up, that's where my mind goes. The Mayans were not keeping time based on our current Gregorian calendar model, so their 2012 was never our 2012. Okay, cool? Alright. That said, what is their 2012? I've seen references to 3 different Gregorian years, 2016, 2017, and 2020. Honestly, I don't know which of these is more accurate, and at this point, I don't even care, because time isn't even real. But the calendar is here as a reference tool for us, and using it, going back in time, I definitely saw a change in myself in 2012. I can trace my own lateral thinking back to that time frame. 2012 is the X that marks the spot on my map. Sandy Hook got me woke, and that's also around the time I saw Berenstain had been wiped from history. By the way, if you type Berenstain into a Word doc, it'll underline it red as if it's misspelled. No, dickheads, I did not mean Berenstain. And if you don't believe me, I posted a photo of it on the show's Instagram feed at occulture_podcast and on Twitter at occulturepod. It really does underline it. But of course, I am curious what you guys think of all this. What do you make of SMQ's 2012 theory? Did we all experience a collective death in the recent past? Perhaps we're stuck in a weird purgatorial state. Maybe we're in the middle of a Lost episode. And what's really going on here with the Mandela effect? Sinister science experiment or false collective memory? So many questions, so little time. Hold up. That's a myth. Hey, if you liked what you heard, please do consider supporting the show at occulturepodcast.com/support. We'll take any spare change you got, any Bitcoin you want to part with. Every cent helps because we're trying to turn this into more than just a part-time thing, more than just a weekly thing, and more than just a podcast thing. I'm coming for more of that free time. I got plans, faux show. For example, I just posted a new blog over at occulturepodcast.com/blog from David Halpin. He's on Twitter at Occult Review. Some of you may follow him. He's on Instagram at The Occult Book Review. The blog post is called Psychnosis, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Archon. It's a pretty cool read. I'll link that in the show notes if you're interested, but I'd like to bring in more voices like that to the Occulture family, and the donations do help with that, because then, maybe I can dangle some spare change at them, because I hate accepting people's work for free. I would love to pay them, and the people that have helped me put this stuff together, whether it's podcasts or blogs, they're so generous with their time and their talent, and I would love to compensate them in the future. So, you wouldn't just be helping me out, you'd be helping out potential contributors down the line. So click on through to the support link and tickle my old feel spot with a donation or two. And that wraps up another one here for me. Thank you so much for hanging out. Until next time, you've just been initiated into Occulture. I am Ryan Peverly, reminding you to love yourself, think for yourself, and question authority.
Please rewind this cassette.